Today, we're going to be answering some questions. And by we, I mean me, but you gave me the questions, which is cool. Thank you for that. You can continue to ask questions about the Verona universe by clicking on the link in chat. And I don't have it handy because I'm unprepared. But it's just scroll up. Scroll up in the chat. You'll find it. Or you can go to the announcements channel on the Verona Discord, and you can click on the link there. Same thing. It's in the Discord. But if for some reason you're tuning in and you're not already a part of the RollPlay Patreon, you're not a part of the Verona Discord or the Faction Turn or any of that stuff, you can get involved. That's a thing you can do. So patreon.com/roleplay, any dollar amount will get you in. Yeah, and thank you, Sabathius, for posting that in chat. I will copy. Here we go. I'll copy that link and I'll throw it in the chat every once in a while as we go along. So my intention for this stream was just to like hang out for a little bit and talk about kind of where we're at, because it's been a year since we started the whole Verona faction turn thing, a year and change. And there's some fairly significant events that have occurred. There's some new stuff going on. I've been getting a lot of questions from people about like what's happening, what's going on about these things. We have a new faction that I want to talk about a little bit today. And I think rather than me starting with a bunch of my kind of bullet points, right, about being like, here are the things I want to discuss, I think your questions pretty much cover it. So what I'll probably do is I'll just go through the questions that I have, and I'll answer them as they stand, but I'll also kind of expound on the topics a little bit and use them as a springboard to talk about some of the more detailed stuff that I wanted to address. So I'm going to just do that. If you have questions, if you have things that you're interested in, it is easy for you to submit those questions. So you can just go ahead and do that. I'll post that link one more time. There you go. Okay, cool. I guess if you're watching this like later on YouTube and you are wishing you had asked the question, we'll do another one of these. This isn't going to be the only time I ever answer questions. So don't worry. If we missed you this time, we'll get around to you another time. So my first question comes from CM Henny of the newly created and still, honestly, still being born Democratic Mandate. The question is, can we take a few minutes to talk about your ideas for the Democratic Mandate? We need a little help corralling us together and reining in some of your ideas. So the Democratic Mandate, we created the role so that people could join the faction. I talked a little bit about the faction in the faction turn, and then everybody joined it and just started making things up. And I was like, friends, horses, you don't even have a home world yet. All you know is that you like democracy. So I think of the Democratic Mandate as okay, so you know how sometimes if you're watching a TV show and they introduce a new character in like episode 9 in a 10 episode arc, and you're like, wait a second, why are you introducing a new character at the end of this season? The reason is because that character will become important in the next season. So putting the Democratic Mandate into play now, rather than saying, okay, this is the beginning of a new sort of season, here's the new characters for this season, this is the beginning of sort of spreading them out into the next season. And they represent a theme that is starting to kind of develop within the Empire, which is change, right? The first sort of season was, how do we resolve this period of uncertainty, right? The conflicts that build up around not having an emperor. The first season was really about kind of moving through the post-war period, right? The post-war with the artificials, kind of going through that and looking forward to what would come after. And sort of as we wrap up this season, and I consider the end of the season basically like once we've resolved the Imperial question, right? Once we know what house is going to sit on the throne, or if there will be no emperor, in which case, you know, that'll be a whole other thing. I'm starting to introduce some of these themes, and we've seen a little bit of this in terms of kind of the period of revelation that the church portends. We're seeing the conflict between House Fornax and House Pixis for Imperial throne, and I think we're looking towards still an uncertain future. But it should be interesting to see kind of where that goes. And the Democratic Mandate is about looking at something that I consider to be like a pretty significant, probably the most in my mind, outside of maybe the whole Operation Alexander Karsten like minigame. I think one of the most significant things the UPC ever did was that whole election process on Ukiah before the UPC was dissolved, right? I think that was the thing. And a lot of people griped because sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. There's someone who will complain about it. That's just how it goes when you have a player base this big, and that's fine. It happens. But some people were griping about like, oh, well, the Democratic Mandate's just the new UPC. We didn't actually kill them. Like, we killed them, and then they get like a 1-up, and they get to come back to life. I can see why people would be confused about that. And because we haven't fully sat down and had a conversation about the Democratic Mandate, how it works, and kind of what it's about, I could see why you might think that. But it's really more that there are people throughout the sector who watched what happened on Ukiah and were inspired by it. That they saw it and they said, okay, it was limited to this one planet, but maybe that planet could be our planet. Maybe we could have more to say. And this could mean, yes, there are going to be people like serfs on other planets whose lives are miserable and whose lords are terrible, who look at this and say, oh, I wish that I could chop off the head of 131 lords and be free forever. But I think what's more interesting is that there are a bunch of members of the Democratic Mandate who are nobles, who are like, you know what? Maybe part of respecting that all humans are God's creatures and that God's creations are perfect, maybe part of shepherding our serfs means giving them responsibility. As a child grows to become an adult, maybe we can give more responsibility. Maybe we can give more power. Maybe we can do something to make everyone better. And maybe this thing. And so what I think about is the UPC was fundamentally anti-noble, fundamentally anti-imperial. They saw the current system and they hated it and they wanted to tear it down by a bunch of different means. But the Democratic Mandate wants to make, I think they're an optimistic faction. Whether their individual members are villains or not is fine, but there's this subline that runs through a ton of different factions, where people have come to me since the beginning of the game and said, what if we were nicer to our serfs? What if we gave our serfs like special rights? I think those people who asked about those things, or those people who are interested in that part of the lore, could move to the Democratic Mandate and fundamentally serve that thing. They still belong to their house, but they're not part of their house's politics. They've moved their focus as characters to the Democratic Mandate. But there are definitely nobles who are looking towards a future in which serfs may become empowered. They might have also seen all of the years and years, like historians might belong to the Democratic Mandate, because if they look at the years and years, hundreds of years of struggle and fighting that is caused by this battle for the imperial throne, or who's in control, maybe we could avoid future terror by dissolving some of that authority into the serfdom. So they have, I think, my intention is the Democratic Mandate, they are vulnerable only in so much as any new idea is vulnerable, but they are significant. They are inspired by what happened on Ukiah, but not tied to the UPC's stuff. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether they are able to make a change. Yeah, I think we're moving, and this, again, remember, the show is influenced by the faction turn, and I am influenced by both, and then I sort of speak for the larger world. I get to say what the common man feels. I'm the the pulse of the people of Acheron Rho. And I think that right now we're seeing the people who are becoming interested in taking a greater purpose in their own destiny, right? Putting their own hand on the tiller alongside their noble lord and alongside God. And I think that the status quo is boring, and it's cool to watch that stuff change. I mean, Jesus, season 1 gave us a ton of interesting changes. And I think we're going to see a new perspective when we start looking at the world, not from the point of view of House Crux, but from the point of view of people on the margins of Acheron Rho's society. We're going to start seeing what we as modern viewers might consider to be like good guys, which is to say, not House Crux boots on your neck, not mind-destroying House Serpent psychics. We're going to get to see another angle on the world. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about putting the Democratic Mandate. They are a looking forward faction. They're not about let's blow up the empire, but they're maybe we can make a change. Maybe there is a way through this that gives people the power to choose their own path in the world, and I think that could be really cool. And it'll be up to them and to the systems of the game and to their diplomacy. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Is the status quo, like it's not like all of a sudden there are going to be nobles, like all the nobles are like, hooray, let's fix it. There are lots of people who are going to be like, yeah, that's not how it works. They have religious backing. They have hundreds of years of history. But what's sort of funny about Acheron Rho is that we, at some point in history, the founding members of the empire, when they arrived, were like, you know what? Obviously, all this democracy and like liberalism and stuff that got us here, right? That stuff didn't work. We don't like that. That was for Earth, and Earth, we're not into it. Let's go back. Let's look at Earth's history and see when was it the best. Oh, cool. The medieval times, the late classical. That was definitely the best time because we had God and we knew who was in charge. Let's do that. Because remember, at some point there were people who came from a society more advanced than ours now, which, you know, it's a fun thing to sort of posit that at some point, like, there was a conversation or a decision where someone said, let's take these people that we like the best and make sure they stay the best forever. And then over hundreds and hundreds of years, yeah, this formal consolidation of power, this thing, like all of this stuff got put into place. And now, after all that time, we're basically reinventing democracy, right? They're trying to. And it's an interesting thing to see kind of how cycles kind of recur. Yeah. So consider the Democratic Mandate a question, and we'll see how the other factions answer that question. There is a chance, and this is true of every faction, there is a chance that you know, if it comes to it, that they might get pummeled. That's just how it might go. But they might also be able to change. And I guess what I'd like to suggest to everyone, not just the Democratic Mandate, but I would like to suggest to everyone who is playing in the faction turn, consider this the beginning of a new season. If you are interested in turning over a new leaf or turning over some change, you are welcome to look at how that might happen within your own faction. I don't mean just join the Democratic Mandate and throw out the Empire. I mean, think about how, let's all imagine we're on an episode of Iron Chef, and the secret ingredient for this episode of Iron Chef is change, right? Is progress. What does that look like for your faction? Does your faction embrace change? Or does your faction reject change? Both are valid. I'm not saying everybody should just give up the status quo. I like that there are going to be people that push back against change, and I think that's valid. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. So there you go. That's a democratic mandate. I know we have a bunch of other questions, some about the democratic mandate, so I'll keep answering them, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go. So this is a question from Arnu in House Cygnus, and of course it's about space. Obviously, ships can't travel fast enough to move between star systems without accessing like spike drives, right? With spike space. It's a theoretical question. Since light travels so far, and even we puny tech level 3 humans can figure out quite a lot from the data it gives us, do the people of Acheron Row know where each system in the sector is relative to the others in real space, or are they so far apart it's impossible to know, even with TL5? I think probably there are people who can like they can figure it out, but no one cares. Like, practically, there are some people, there are astronomers who definitely would be like, yeah, totally. If you wanted to get in a spaceship traveling at the speed of light, you could get from Imperial Prime to Gats, and it would only take you like 7,000 years. We definitely don't know where Earth is. I think we don't know. We don't know all of the different like planets where all of them are. But I bet you we could have some idea of a few of them, because it makes sense, right? You can figure out like using fairly primitive technology to you can figure out how what a sun looks like from a great distance. But it just isn't practical to care about that. Yeah. So in the universe, metadimensional distances and actual distance are very, very different. Yeah. So while a system might be close to another system in spike space, they're going to be very, very far apart. Yeah. Now, there aren't any immortal people. There are people we don't know when they're going to die of old age, and those people need constant medical treatments. So you'd have to load up a whole lot of scientists and gear and renewable like resources to keep somebody alive like that over a 7,000 year trip. The guild aren't people. Yeah, they're not the guild. They're not people. They're like post-human. We don't know the origin story of the guild. They were human at some point. We know that. There might have been they might have been another noble house. They might have been the crew of a spaceship. We don't really know about them. They have a lot of stuff going on, and their presence in Acheron Row is very, very limited in the sense that they have other projects going on in other sectors under different names, etc. So they arrived as humans and are now something different. Yeah. So let's see. We got a question from Shirlene of the Maya Brunch crew. Shirlene asks, to what extent is faction turn for a fight? The rules imply conflict is part of the game. General atmosphere is hostile to hostility. Please expound on what role conflict plays in the fact turn. It's very important. Obviously, the mechanisms are all. It's like D&D, right? To what degree is D&D for a fight? The faction turn is designed to explain and slightly randomize and gamify faction conflict. It's designed to do that. So when I say we took over this planet and you say no you don't, we have a system to manage it. Now, however much you engage that system, that's going to vary. And people are going to push back in the same way that if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and everyone in your group wants to play Tiefling Bards and you want to min-max so that you can win fights and get experience, there's going to be some clash. I think there is room for people who are not that interested in, and we've talked about this so many times, but there's room in the game, in the faction turn space, for people who are not interested in participating in the conflict stuff, but they have to recognize that if you are not willing to participate in the conflict stuff will still happen. It's like you don't have to vote if you don't want to, but somebody will elect a president. Like, if you really don't like voting, that's fine, but that's saying someone else will make those decisions for you, and you may not like them, you know? So I think that, yeah, I mean, the faction turn is designed to give us things to write lore about. Things happen in the faction turn, and then we explain them in the universe with lore, and that's how that process works. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's see. Dom at Serf asks, this might be a bit general, but could you talk a bit more about your thought process for deciding when something in the fiction qualifies to become mechanically represented as a faction? I'm particularly interested in the answer to the context of factions dying and being born. How does a faction dying, in principle, affect whatever group or ideology that gave birth to them, and what kind of consideration go into decisions, such as your decision to create the democratic mandate in response to the events in Ukiah? I'm sure you don't have any hard rules for this. That's true, Dom, I don't. So I'm just interested in your general thought process. That's a great question. So for creating new factions, which I've only done once, the democratic mandate, I mean, we did it at the beginning, obviously, but the democratic mandate is the first time I have said, here is a new faction. So in terms of managing factions, obviously I don't do anything to affect whether the faction lives or dies once it exists, right? I don't step in. I let things happen as they happen. We roll the dice and play it out, right? So dying, I really have I have no impact or influence on that. When a faction dies, I look at how that will affect predominantly, as with everything that happens in the faction turn, I predominantly look at how that'll affect my ongoing RPG, because that's what for me the big value of like events that occur within the system and how those work. So like, for example, when House Vela was destroyed, when the Valan Ascendancy fell, the idea is that for me the big change is now the universe is having this conflict over travel, right? So that'll show up in season 2 of Far Verona, right? Where it'll be like, well, you know, we could take you from this planet to that planet, but it's a dangerous trip now. It wasn't before, right? Everything is slower. Everything is more difficult to move around. And that reflects predominantly in the fiction. I'm using the mechanisms of the game to affect the fiction of my RPG, right? Because I don't do mechanical changes across the board, right? Like saying, oh, now everybody's movement is slower. Like those kinds of changes are way too big and way too complex to just throw into the game. And I don't like the idea of tying every faction to some kind of like big rule thing. I guess we could in a future version of the game do something like that, right? Where you would be able to say this faction is responsible for this thing in the universe, and if they die, then this will happen. But basically, yeah, there's a labor crisis, navigation is all fucked, and the Empire is in a pretty bad place in the fictional stuff that I use to make my game. And then in terms of like creating new factions, I'm very reluctant. So the reason I only did one this year was because I just didn't want to add a bunch more, right? I didn't want to just add a ton of stuff to the game because the game is already complex enough. And with the splitting of the houses minor, there are new factions that can get created there. And it's like, I don't need to add layers of complexity to a game that's already complex, right? I don't want the faction turn to take 5 hours. So there is a balance there too. Like keeping it between like 12 and 15 factions feels like about right to me. But yeah, I keep an eye on what happens in the faction turn and in the lore, and I like read articles on the wiki, and sometimes like what happened on Ukiah, I get interested enough that I think it warrants creating something brand new. Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of answers a Blanchette's question from the Trillion Ring. So Blanchette asks, are there any plans to add more noble houses or allow larger houses to spawn into smaller ones like Vela did? Also, now that there'll be an Emperor, will they have other abilities outside the normal game to enact Imperial will? Like how Vela were able to split their house and forge a new one, would just grant them a more liberal creative license when it comes to the end of a conflict. If a house wanted to split, it would create two weaker, smaller factions. They would have to divvy up their stuff. They would both become smaller. And yeah, one of them would get to stay the house, and the other could be like a Pixis to a Vela, right? I guess that could be possible. I don't know that's been something that's been an option since day one, but nobody has wanted to take it. And I don't think there's any internal division strong enough to create two weaker factions from a stronger one. I don't think anyone wants to go down that road, and that's very much by design. But it is possible. Adding more noble houses, that's blasphemy. These are all the houses we have, right? There are no other houses. So let's not worry about that anymore, shall we? So now that the Emperor, now that there will be an Emperor, so mechanically, the house that becomes the Imperial house, oh yeah, this is my invisible T. The house that becomes the Imperial house, if it is House Fornax or House Pixis, mechanically, they will get access to new materials. So like they'll get some free assets. We've talked a little bit before about like the Imperial stuff once they unlock the vault and gain access to control of those things. So they'll get some assets. They will get probably a bunch of experience to spend, right? And then once they're not the Imperial house anymore, if that happens, they'll lose that experience, but they get that much experience to spend on their stats. They'll probably get a boost of fact creds. And then in the lore, technically, what they say will be law. So they can declare people enemies of the Empire. They can decide who gets what planets, that sort of thing. But they just get to say those things. It's up to everyone else to agree with them, right? So they can use their own assets to prove it out, right? If they say, let's imagine that Pixis takes over as the Emperor, just I'm randomly picked. So they take over as the Emperor, and they're like, we're gonna pick a fight with Fornax for ever deciding to like hassle us. Fornax has to give up the shipyards at Maya to House Pixis. We are taking them. We're taking them under Imperial control. They're ours now. Get out. You can have Hakani, right? House Fornax would have to decide whether or not to obey the Emperor. And then the other houses would have to decide whether or not to obey. This is how we get civil wars, right? The Emperor declaring intense shit that nobody agrees with. So yes, in the lore, if that house would like to issue an Imperial edict, they should talk about that edict with their supporters, with their allies, with their court, right? Talk about it with the church, and they can come to me and say, we are issuing an Imperial edict, which I will then deliver for them to the Discord. But the thing is, like, it still has to be sane. Like, this is how it works, right? Yeah. So that's the thing. They can make big declarative statements in the same way, and this is a funny thing that's come up a bunch of times, in the same way, like anything that House Crux says is the law is the law. If House Crux says it is illegal to wear blue jeans in the Empire, it is now illegal in the Empire to wear blue jeans. They can make that statement. They can declare these edicts. But like, it's up to the rest of the Empire to decide whether or not they're going to keep wearing blue jeans or not, right? Like, they have that power. It is their mandate as part of the Empire, but it's not like, you know, it's up to the government gets to say what the laws are, and it's up to us to decide whether or not we want to follow those laws. And then it's up to the police to police us in following those laws, right? Like, if the government says it is illegal to do a thing and you do the thing and the police never bother you about it, there's no reason to stop doing the thing. Right? Yeah. So in the same way, the emperor has the power to do all kinds of ridiculous stuff, but it's up to the structures of power to enforce or agree or disagree with those edicts. But it is pretty serious because theoretically they're the emperor and they are the embodiment of God on earth, unless the High Church says otherwise, and they should theoretically have these like de facto allies that will back them up. Yeah. So that's kind of, they can also like tell factions what to do with their turn, or they can tell people like what to focus on and like all of that stuff. But again, like, you can say what you want. You just have to have the ability to back it up. So I have another question from Serf. This is from Glass, sibling Fari. And Glass asks, I wonder if there was anything to be said or you had in your mind in terms of how the CHR's rebranding influenced your thoughts on creating the democratic mandate. Like I think that there was influence in the sense that I saw the CHR change to avoid conflict, right? And I like that idea. I like the idea of like, if your enemies, the UPC could have done this, right? Like, if your enemies abhor who you are on the surface, you could change who you are underneath so as to survive, right? Like Serf has some of the same ideas, but has changed their colors, right? They've chameleoned so that the church no longer feels it's necessary to punch them to death. It's basically just it's a branding change. It's a redirection of energy. And so I thought, what would the universe think of the death of the UPC, right? And how would that affect the world? And how would the Yakia stuff affect the world? And there is a space, I think there's an alternate universe version of this where the UPC abandoned their goals before they died, abandoned their goals, kicked out all the sub factions, and became something like the democratic mandate instead. But this is different, right? Both mechanically and lore-wise. This isn't a reincarnation of the UPC. This is an inspiration on that, and then something new. So, like, there's obviously some connection there in my head, but it's very loose. Yeah. So Chrisploitation of the Deathless Conflict Solutions Group asks, what is the legal status of toasters within the Empire? Are they condemned with all other synths, or are there exceptions? Now, remember, so when we're talking about toasters, we mean old model synthetics, not the current model, not the awesome, like, perfect humans that House Cygnus made, but like the old version of that. They're not quite C-3PO. No, they're the Nintendo 64 of synths. And remember, the crime that House Cygnus committed, above and beyond all the treasonous shit, but the crime they committed was a mockery of God, right? They tried to do God's job better than they can, right? So House Cygnus was like, we can make better humans, like perfect humans. And they made these soulless abominations that are a mockery of God. Toasters, Vistas, they're not a mockery of anything. They're just machines. Right? Mostly they have broken down and gone away. We don't really care about them. They're pretty rare. Cause like when did the I'm looking at the history of the sector. When did we unleash the first true? Yeah, it was 200 years ago. The first synthetic human, was revealed 200 years ago. So these things are ancient. as far as technology goes. So there's probably not that many of them. Yeah, and they're just kind of like around. I think most people just see them as like pitiable and crappy. There are probably places where they still exist alongside humans. They're probably most prevalent. They're probably most prevalent on Honglu, actually. Because as they got decommissioned or as they got like crappier, they were probably turned into factory workers to make better versions of themselves. Yeah. So really, like, they're still out there. They're around, but nobody sees them as a threat because they're not a threat in the same way. They're not a threat in the same way that synths were, like on a spiritual level. There was no edict. Like, for the church to go out and say the Model X synth, this model of synthetic humanoid, they're not even called synths, but these things are abominations in the eyes of God, we must cast them out, would be like the Pope coming out and saying that the 1964 Chevrolet, I don't know, say the Volkswagen Beetle, the every model of Volkswagen Beetle from 1990 before is an abomination in the eyes of God. We'd be like, Papa, dude, the God does not care about cars. Right? Like it would be weird and silly because there's no question. They're machines. Yeah, more like the Model T, honestly. Yeah. Yeah. When were synths made illegal? That's in the timeline. Yeah. The declaration, let's see here. Declaration was made somewhere around, let's see. Here we go. 3184. Yeah, 3184. Are there old model robot collectors? Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, definitely there are. Yep. Cool. So let's see what else we got. We got lots of questions. Niklaus Oberon, also of Deathless, asks, the faction turn's been very focused on big things happening in the Imperial core. The war with the STO, the fall of the House of Vela, the Yakia situation. How is this affecting life on the periphery of the sector? Were these events all consuming to the sector and drawing in people, resources, and attention toward the core worlds, or would many planets have escaped unscathed or be unaware of what's happening? More generally, how much of the information, influences, and consequences of those events being disseminated into the far reaches of Acheron Rho? So how much something affects your homeworld depends on whether it's happening there or not first. So if there is a faction with an asset or a base of influence on your planet, suddenly that planet is worth a lot more in terms of spotlight, right? The universe at large cares way more about you now because there is a faction paying attention, right? Nobody cared about Tootham until the beginning of the faction turn. Now Tootham's a big deal because there's been all this weird fighting and scrapping over it, and it's just like this strange night planet, but it matters because the faction turn has effects occurring there, right? I think if you live on a world where none of the factions have ever been, you're probably aware of what's going on unless you're cut off by quarantine or something. Like Prism is very good at their job. And to that extent, Prism gets to decide what you know. Right? If you're on one of these backwater planets and there's no other faction paying attention to you, it falls to Prism to decide like who gets what info, because that's their thing. That's what they do. Yeah, I think attention from the faction turn makes a planet matter. It's like Tatooine, right? Tatooine doesn't matter, except that it does, because that's where Star Wars happens. Yeah. Yeah. So, Lord Metadimensional Engineer Triangulum Twardowski Jonathan of the House of Triangulum asks, was wondering if you had any ideas about addressing the position of hegemons in current play. Fear of rebuke from them closes off mechanical pursuits, and while I feel that they're allies, I think it discourages conflict amongst ourselves. Yeah, like there are factions that are bigger. Some factions are bigger than others, and there is a world. I don't want to panic anybody. So like, if you are a member of this faction and you are hearing me speak, don't panic. There's no concrete plans, but I could see a future where we retire the High Church if an emperor isn't crowned. Par exemple. Right? So like, there are things that I could see happening where, like, I think the High Church is the main one, right? The High Church is the hammer hanging over. It's the sword of Damocles, right? And this wouldn't be something that I would just say like, you are dead, sorry. But I would put it to that faction and say, hey, so what do you think? Like, maybe it's time for the High Church to dissolve into the background, right? To just become a given. That might be a thing, right? Because we've talked about this being something as like kind of a loss for them. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is that there are other large factions. I think calling a faction a hegemon or a hegemony or whatever is not practical or helpful because it's not part of the. It's not something that it just sets them apart because they're big. I think if you disagree with a big faction, you need to have friends that also disagree with them, and so it's beneficial for the bigger factions not to, not to get into that position. But I don't think it's really fucking up the game. I think it's working the way we designed it, and I think it's very intentional. I have some thoughts about kind of exit conditions for a lot of the factions, not just the bigger ones. But yeah, I don't feel like it's too disruptive right now. Connor of Fornax asks, are we going to see Cygnus return in some form in season 2? Not in the faction turn, because they're dead. Their home planet is a melted ball of glass, and their lineage has been stamped out. Or the smart ones married into other houses and did their best to erase their... I mean, I imagine that there are, like, reticulum assassins that are, like, they have a list of Cygnus people that, like, married out of House Cygnus, and they're like, no, you don't get away that easy. And they're just like one by one, like poisoning them and like stabbing them and like slowly offing them. Even though technically they're not House Cygnus anymore. They've given up their villainous house. But there are definitely people who are like, no, you're still going to get it. So yeah, I could very much see that being the case. And I definitely think that kind of like fallen Cygnus, people who are used to be part of it, definitely, yeah, like we'll see that more in season 2, because a Cygnus NPC in season 1 would just get murdered. They just get killed, right? So that's just a given. So now we have a little bit of room for these fallen nobles to exist. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at on that one. So let's see. Aka of House Lyra asks, Yanaratso and Eos are 2 non-core planets with TL4 plus technology. What tech makes them plus, or is that best left to factions who manage to reach them first? A lot of the time, unless I have a specific idea, like with Yanaratso and Eos, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I leave it to whoever takes that planet first, and then we will work it out together. The tags that exist in the universe are there to posit questions, and I don't want to answer those questions necessarily just de facto. I like the idea that if there is a tech level 4+ planet and you are interested in telling me what it is, then you can go to that planet and you can settle it, and then we'll talk about it. And then you have lore authority over that world. Yeah. So Neutron Donor of the fledgling Democratic Mandate has asked, will there be mechanical reasons for the other factions to work with the DM, or will continued survival of the faction and in-character lore updates be sufficient to advance the Mandate's goals in your mind? The Mandate is responsible for its own onward momentum. I'm not here to help anybody win, but I've been thinking about the Democratic Mandate's faction tag, and I'm thinking about some ideas for how to mechanically incentivize certain things, some certain allowances to the Mandate. Yeah, it's definitely on my mind. I'm not really into the idea of like mechanical benefits for allying with them in any way, because alliances aren't real. Alliances aren't real. Friendly factions don't exist. Everyone is your rival, even if they are your best friend. But allowing them to get away with stuff in exchange for some kind of benefit, I have considered that. I have considered it. So we'll see. I'm thinking about it. I want it to work in a certain way, and so I've been pondering it. Yeah. Cool. All right. So Veron of the House of Eridanus asks, do nobles actually own the land upon which they live, or is the empire like historical England and the land all belongs to the emperor and is leased to the nobility? How does this affect noble houses and their ancestral homeworlds? What kind of property or ownership rights do nobles have in general? So what matters most about being a noble is owning land. The landed gentry is what matters. Your homeworld is what makes you a noble. This is why Pixis took so long to take seriously, because it was like, well, what planet do you have? Oh, you've a space station, eh? Great. So basically, all the planets in Acheron Row belong to God because God made them. I know it's not a space station. It's a mysterious planetoid. You're right. So, God made the universe. God owns the universe. The universe is the property of God, right? God made humans. God speaks to humanity through their Messiah, the Emperor. The Emperor, as the representative of God in the world, is therefore also God, and thus is the creator and owner of all things. Worlds, which is to say land, matters, right? Land is the most important resource because it represents a connection to God, right? And so basically the nobles are given they're the shepherds of their people, and these are the field in which their flock is attended to. So it's like legally the emperor could take away anything that they wanted, but I don't think that aside from maybe the blood eagle, I don't think anyone's ever done that. Yeah. So like Hakani belongs to no one right now because it is a noble house, and no one can take it in a legal sense because it belongs to a dead child of the empire. But once there's an emperor, that emperor can say, here you go. It's like Arrakis, right? Arrakis belongs to Shaddam the Fourth, and Shaddam gets to be like, Harkonnen, get the fuck out of here. Atreides, you're in charge, right? And then House Harkonnen's like, Atreides nuts, son. But that's the idea, right? Is that the emperor gets to make these decisions, but in a practical sense, some people have just been where they are forever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so Let's see here. What's next on my questions? G. Zendasal of the Democratic Mandate asks, 1, can serfs organize in any way, shape, or form? I mean, they can. I don't know if it's going to do anything. 2, how exactly does the noble granted land under the emperor apply to serfs? Serfs are the property of property. They are the what's the word? The flock, right? They are the charge. That's the word. Serfs are the charge of the noble whose land they are born on. So if you really don't like your lord, smuggling your pregnant spouse to another lord's domain and then having them give birth is, 1, a really great way to get out of that, and 2, a really great way to make two nobles fight each other. Because your old lord might be like, I don't care, take them. Or they might be like, that should rightly belong to me, how dare you? And then fight time. We'll talk a little bit more about serfs' ability to move around later. So the serfs are part of the land, right? Like when you think about how this works, think about the farm, right? You think about the land, the factory, the world, whatever, as all being the planet and everything on it. And that includes serfs, right? Serfs are part of the land. The land belongs to the nobles. The nobles' job to serve God and the emperor is to make that planet prosperous, and that includes the serfs on it. 3 is the chain of being reinterpretable, or rather can be applied differently than how it's currently interpreted. Democratic Mandate, if you would like to or are able to put some influence on the high church, they can come out and say, this is a reinterpretation of the chain that more clearly helps us understand God's intention, right? They can rewrite any part of their own dogma by just saying, like, scholars have discovered a truer adaptation of the great chain of being. They get to make that call and maybe open up a diplomatic channel with them and talk to them as players, right? Don't just talk to them as characters, but say, like, hey, what parts of the Democratic Mandate, what change are you interested in, and how can we work together to alter the universe through these things? How can we work together? Let's make like a lore release, and what influence does the Democratic Mandate have on the church, and vice versa, right? Yeah, okay. So, Manticore Rider for Hire asks, the Democratic Mandate, what's the deal with that? We already answered that question. But thankfully, Manticore Rider for Hire has another question. How does the sector at large view the recent merging between the corpse and the noble houses? So, like, the sector at large probably doesn't know anything about or didn't even really notice House Triangulum's situation. Unless you were a serf of Triangulum, in which case probably you would be like, oh, your boss doesn't belong to the group of bosses they used to belong to. Nothing has changed for you. If you live on Honglu, probably a bigger deal. All of a sudden, the Triangulum flag is flying over all these buildings, right? It really, really depends on who you are. I think if you are not part of either of those factions and you don't live in the core like worlds and you're not like a political serf, which I guess would be a thing, you just don't, you probably don't notice. Acre and Eridanus is a bigger deal. And I think most people, because most people in the Empire are loyal to it, most people saw it as a peaceful end to what they expected to be a horrific war. They see it as the right and good thing. They like Acre as a thing. They probably look back at Acre better now because Acre performed. I mean, is humility one of the virtues? Let me take a look. My church lore is not as good as it could be. Let me see. Propriety, diligence, charity. I guess propriety, right? Yeah. It's not, but propriety is close. Being obedient to tradition, courtesy, and station. They bent the knee, right? They basically, like, most people see it as like Acre kneeling before their rightful lords and being taken up into their number as they look at it as being like good job, you did it. You know, I think they're most people are probably happy about that, and they see Acre as having finally come around. You know, it's like when you the black sheep of the family finally gives up trying to be a rock and roll musician and gets a real job and cuts their hair. You're like, yes, good. You've become normal like us. And I think they're really, for the most part, I think House Eridanus is probably like polling pretty high these days in terms of, you know, how people feel about them, because they're like, well, on the one hand, they're the tax man and they take all our money, but like on the other hand, they stopped a war. So I think they get a lot of, it's improved the opinions of them in all of the people's eyes. Now, there are people who look at this differently because their experience is they were an Acre employee or their life has been disrupted by this in some meaningful way. But I think that's probably a personal and closer to the conflict thing. If we're looking at the empire at large, that's kind of where I think they're at. So, Nako asks, let's see here. How hard is it for a serf to migrate, both legally and legally? How do factions get immigrants of worlds of new opportunity or labor shortfalls? Is this part of the labor crisis? Yeah, I mean, moving people around is a big deal. Everybody kind of wants to hang on to their serfs. There's also like 200 years of like shitty education too, right? Like serfs spent a long time, like several generations, learning less and less and letting. It was an age of glory because even serfs had that third pillar of growth, right? Where if you want to be like a growing modern society, there needs to be downtime for specialization. That's right. So shitty education in the sense that it's not useful now, but we created all of these like ivory tower serfs, librarian serfs, like dancers and artists, and it was like a golden age because humans could do glorious human shit, and serfs could suffer, and synths could suffer for us, and even a serf had a pretty easy life. And now it's like, guess what? No one knows how to grow wheat properly anymore. Like we know it, but we don't have the people to go out into the field and plant it. And so there's all of these like upper echelon education programs for these serfs, and now they have all these, God, it's just like fucking real life. They all went to school and they got like English degrees and philosophy degrees, and we were all really proud of those degrees, and we went out into the world, and the world was like, yo, we just really need people to like make things with their hands. So that 4-year psychology degree you got, no one needs that anymore. We don't want that. Yeah, exactly. Political science degrees. Like, listen, a lot of us have this feeling. And they need, the universe needs craftsmen. They need like people who know how to build and make and grow things, because we just had a big war and we had to genocide the people that were able to do that. Empire's great. We're doing good. We're doing fine. So let's talk about migration of serfs. So remember, the serf belongs to the land. The serf is a part of the land. So on a given planet, various facilities will change hands, and the people, like someone will come down one day and be like, yon lord upon the house on the hill, who doth wave the flag of crux, frees you from your service. And the peasants are like, hooray! And then the guy's like, yon noble lord in the house upon the hill that doth fly the flag of Fornax doth thank you for your service. And they're like, yay. Right, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss. that is a way for serfs to migrate in the sense that they now belong to someone else because they were traded. I think that happens across worlds. I definitely think that worlds with lots of people have definitely had someone come and be like, all right, farmers, get on the spaceship. And they're like, but we live here. And they're like, I don't fucking care. You're going to this other planet and you're going to learn how to grow corn. And they're like, but we make circuit boards, sir. Well, get on the ship, corny. Like that definitely happens, right? Where they're just like, people get moved around. I think the question here becomes migration by choice. Serfs don't get to choose where they live, period. End of statement. However, for an individual serf or an individual group of serfs, like a family, depending on how secure the planet is, depending on their law score, it really depends, but it wouldn't be that hard to sneak away, right? You scrape and you save and you embezzle and you take your money and you pay a smuggler to smuggle you and your family off world and you move somewhere else. And then you either hide out for the rest of your life or you find a noble who's willing to adopt you. And again, that's like kind of illegal in the sense that you're stolen property. Now, another noble lord could, perhaps one that's part of the democratic mandate, another noble lord could be like, you know what? We can make up a backstory for you. You can work in my circuit board fields, and I can pretend that maybe you were like a lost cousin of some other guys that belong to me, and that's fine. We'll work you into the situation. But someone else might find out and be like, "What the fuck? These are mine. Those serfs are my charge. Give them back to me." And they're like, "But we don't want to live on Hyra." And you're like, "Well, shut up, get on the boat," right? But usually, like, an individual family or an individual serf is just not that important to go chasing across the universe for. Yeah, they can also just pay a fee and be like, very well, we will buy from you these serfs, right? And again, I use that as a shorthand, but technically and legally, you cannot own a person in Acheron Row. Slavery in all its forms is illegal. Serfs are the charge of their noble lord, and it's not, I'm giving you credit so that I can buy your serfs. It's, I'm paying you to allow your serfs to become my responsibility, right? I'm not paying you, so it's not a serf, it's not an exchange. It's, I'm giving you money to make up for the money you were going to lose by not having them. They're going to make money for me. Thank you. Right? Here is, yeah, exactly. You own their labor. You own the land they live on. You own everything they've ever made. But you don't own them. They're free in the eyes of God. But they're not free to do whatever they want or live where they want or... Yeah. It's fine. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. And there is a crisis because people don't have people to do the work they need to get done. Yeah. I mean, I think as far as like human trafficking, like this isn't to say that people don't get kidnapped and sent to Tootham to work in the darkness mines or whatever. Like that still happens, but like large scale, socially acceptable enslavement is ethically, morally, and legally very bad. We don't do it. Which I think is what is part of what is like allowing this idea of like new ideas to potentially emerge, right? Because as long as the nobles still get the power and the money, they might be able to give, like, as long as the democratic mandate doesn't put forth like, I say we vote for who gets to be noble, no one would ever agree to that. We have to be able to respect and understand that nobility are attached to certain privileges, but we need to make those privileges, if it is possible, allowed to exist without also being harmful to the people. So this is what I'm interested in, this kind of question. Like, how do we ethically operate these situations while retaining a hierarchical power structure, and is that possible? Can it be done in our little fictional universe that we've created? So, Sunwalker Pixis Typhoon Coolio, as you can imagine, of House Pixis, asks, how much worse would you say the state of the sector is now than it was at the start of the game? With a war recently concluded, another noble house dead, and a new crisis on the rise before the old one had been tackled, how bad are things currently looking in the day-to-day life of Acheron Row? I think overall, it depends on who you ask. Things are pretty sunny for the spiritual health of the universe, especially if we get an emperor, right? Because the devil is dead, the devil's home planet has been turned to goo, and the devil's children are still being like sought out and murdered. We're getting rid of them. We're purging the empire. We've had a false child, rise up against their parent and been struck down. We had enemies to the empire recant their crimes and rejoin, like things from a top level propaganda thing. This is the thing, we have people starving. We have seed farms full of unplanted seed falling apart, right? Seeds dying and going away because we don't know how to plant them properly. We have starvation. We have ships getting lost. Like, practically, there's a lot of really bad shit going on. But I think that the Imperial propaganda is, hooray, everything's going great, right? Like, look at all these good things that have occurred. Our allies in the Trillionth Ring are rebuilding the southern part of the sector. Our good and trustworthy allies, those wonderful people who will never turn on us. We've really started to fix things. We're turning it around. But are we though? I think that honestly, human suffering on a day-to-day starvation and toil sense have not been this bad in a long time. Yes, we don't have Aquila death squads kicking down people's doors and murdering people in the name of the Blood Eagle, right? Our noble lord is no longer at war with anybody else. However, people are still starving and suffering. Even the pirates have turned nice. But honestly, I don't think things are that great for your average person. Yeah. So it's interesting. Lots of stuff got better. Progress was made. But again, these are things that I think that for now are not they're not fixable, right? You, the factions, don't have tools for any of those things, right? Like, to solve the labor crisis, to solve the transit crisis, you would need mechanical tools to do that, right? It's like how in Dungeons and Dragons, if you want to resolve an argument, you can try to make a persuasion check, but it's probably more likely you're going to be able to win what you want to win with your sword and your spells. Which is why, and I don't have really any new details for this yet, but this is why the Shadowy Cabal for Economic Change is being created. Because my priority, I want a big Season 2 mechanical patch where the factions can spend money on group projects, right? If I have to kind of spin it out of my head, I imagine that there will be a way to choose a project and sink your own fact creds into it, to have other people commit their fact creds to it as well, and then when it happens, there's an improvement, a lore improvement to the world, but it might only affect the worlds belonging to the people that contributed, right? There'll be roles involved, maybe assets. We'll see. It's a big patch, and I am putting a lot of thought into it before I even turn it over to anybody. But that is the ultimate goal of the Shadowy Cabal for Economic Change. Not only what do we do with all these fat creds? But how do we get that science victory? How do we finish the Utopia project? Yeah. So thinking about it. All right. What else do we got? What other questions do we have? After the events of this last year in the fact turn, have the amount of synths left in the sector dropped particularly? Will the PCs have a harder time finding and aiding synths than they would have a year ago? This is from Hajira of the House of Reticulum. Yeah, I mean, yes, there are no new synths being made, and Crux had ships out in the universe retiring them. Their numbers are dwindling. Yeah. Yeah, their numbers are dwindling dramatically. They are dying off. And that'll be a question for the players. Like, do you want safety and protection for yourself? Or do you want to go on that epic quest to save synth kind? Is that possible? Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then that's the other question, right? What is Verona? How does Verona play into this? Because we talked a little bit about Verona and the Verona mystery being part of season 2 as well. So what's that all about? Yeah. So there's lots of people arrayed against synths, and yeah, they're definitely on their way. They're definitely on their way out. They have a crisis of their own kind. They are a displaced people. I mean, they never really had a home to begin with because they were made to serve. So, yeah. Let's see here. Maxwell Baker of the Prism Network says, for the Prism news ship campaign setup, you mentioned that folks who are not officially affiliated with the Prism Network can find, write, and sell stories to the corporation. Would you say this is where most news stories come from, or would Prism in-house official reporters write most of that? How's the relationship between these two groups? I don't see them as like two distinct groups. There's like everybody that works for Prism, and that makes up the majority of where news comes from. And then there are people who report on stuff and send it to the corporation, and the corporation decides what to run. And I think it's for the most part in-house Prism stuff. I don't imagine that the majority of Prism news would come from amateurs. Prism's very good at collecting information. They've been doing it a long time, and yeah, they absolutely have like their own internal stuff that handles most of that. I think that if we had gone the route of the news crew, they would have been like outliers, but certainly, still a part of the thing. Yeah, they've got connections, right? They've got connections within the noble houses. They have like leaks, basically, right? People who feed them info. They have contacts and connections, but I think mostly the people that do the news are they're the people of Prism. Yeah. Cool. All right. So remember, if you want to ask a question, put it in the form. I'll post the form again. I saw a couple of people at me with questions, but if you have questions, put them in the form, because that's where I'm looking for them, and I'll lose them if they're in chat. They'll drift by. Let's see. Okay, so if the PCs ever want to get some cybernetics, this is from Curious Mercenary from the Deathless. If the PCs ever want to get some cybernetics, will we use the list available in the Stars Without Number rulebook, or does Genesis have its own list? Genesis, I know that there are cybernetics in Shadow of the Beanstalk, and I would start there and build out, but I would use Stars Without Number as an indicator of what is possible currently. Yeah. Look at what's already in the two books and try to make them fit. Yeah. Arch Anwalt Tiago of House Crux asks, in a post STO sector, How is the general influence of corporations changing, if at all? Are they in decline, taking advantage of the situation, or shifting towards crown corps being the norm? Corporations are definitely in decline. I think smaller non-faction corporations, when they saw Acre join Eridanos, immediately petitioned to become a crown-owned corporation, right? I think watching Acre bend the knee meant that a lot of other small corporations did the same. I think a lot of people in the sector never really understood what their intent was anyway, and I think that the corporations were ahead of their time. Ahead of their time. Ahead of their time in a way that made it so they couldn't survive. I think that they fell apart because of that. They may rise again as an idea, right? The idea of an incorporated group of serfs given special permission to do things. I think that's certainly an idea that'll stick around, but they were a middle class before the universe was ready for a middle ground. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So Ty, who is soon to be a member of the Democratic Mandate, asks, with Nomi knowing the Serpent's assassin, is there a chance the assassin can escape their execution? I feel like maybe it's too late for them now. Has it happened? Like, do we have an execution date yet? Because I'm pretty sure they're toast. The official like announcement has been made, and I think it's gonna happen. I think it's a done deal. Yeah, I believe it's already happened. Yeah. So ask the church. The church knows about they know about this. Ask House Serpents. But that's the deal. That is the deal. Yeah. Before the first season, you created several alien races, which we have seen nothing of. Will there be alien NPCs in this season? Yeah, maybe. You remember, aliens are really, really weird in Acheron Row, and so it's kind of hard to play like a sentient cloud of crystalline objects. You know? Like it's hard for me to portray aliens. So yeah, like, sure, maybe. They're not kill on sight. They're not animals to these people necessarily. But yeah, I think it's more likely that we'll see alien intelligence in this season. Yeah. Let's see. I have a question here from an intelligent piece of celery. I don't know how celery got a hold of a keyboard, but that's fine. I'll answer your question, you fibrous stalk. While Vela is not large enough to be a faction, they placed a base of influence on Urgus, far from the center of the sector. It has the only Preceptor archive, and I feel it might be an interesting thing to look into. Any intention of looking into that planet, or is its implication after the destruction of the Great Library? Maybe. Like it's if the players went there, it could certainly be possible. If a faction goes to Urgus and like starts settling it, then I would talk with them about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm asking me if I have any intention of looking into something or if I'm interested in something. The answer is always like, yeah, totally. But usually I want to let the faction turn or my fan fiction RPG show turn their eyes on that thing. Right now, my curiosity has to be limited to whatever's in the spotlight. Otherwise, I'm doing that world building thing where I'm like, I spent 45 hours detailing Urgus for nothing, for no reason at all. Because all I would be doing would be preparing for the players to go there on the show or taking up space that I could be working with a faction on. And I would way rather work with a faction. Yeah. Pulitzer of the Trilliant Ring says, first off, I love this universe you created for us to explore. Thank you. I love it too. Are there plans or a possibility for an NPC or GM faction as an adversary for the PC factions? That would be so unfair. Like, if I made a faction for myself, I would get to see all of your orders before I choose what I do, and then I would get to just like just fuck with you. I would have to justify it as like I don't even know. There would have to be some kind of justification that would allow the faction to have massive foresight. But I don't have any interest in creating a faction for myself. If I did make a more adversarial faction, I would just let you run it. Like, yeah. I don't think this universe. So this is another thing that differentiates this from, say, like Swansong. Like in Swansong, the universe had a foe. It had the Warmind, right? And the Warmind's like weird zombie Bjorg army. There's no universal foe in Far Verona. It's like an enemy within situation. Yeah. All you have to fight is yourselves. Yeah. Let's see here. Can you give the new ones of us, this is Dire Matter who's trying to choose a faction. Can you give the new ones of us a rundown of the factions? Maybe not during this stream, but like eventually. I feel like that's a thing I saw getting like passed around. Like I feel like each faction's trying to create its own thing, but y'all are fucking wordy. You like coming up with like, oh, you're interested in joining a faction? Well, here's a document with 27 pages for each faction. I mean, you can look at the Far Verona wiki. That's pretty good. There's some good like stuff there, but it is a lot. I don't know that there's like a single page with like a couple of sentences about each faction. Here, let me here, I'll do a quick rundown. Okay. House Fornax, angry spaceship makers that like brunch and they're friends with pirates. House Crux, some of them are lawyers and some of them are cops, and they all of them like purple, and they tell you what to do because they're the police. The House is Minor. There used to be a lot of them. Now there's not a lot of them. And there's a fighty boy and a snake boy, and they did a bad thing, but it wasn't really their fault. And then there's another one, and they make swords. And sometimes they stab people with those swords, but only in secret. There's the Confederation of the Upright Vagrant, and they're pirates, and they used to be pirates, but there's different pirates now. And they're good guy pirates and not bad guy pirates. House Triangulum are nerds, but they're like nerds who have friends in the mob. They're like those guys who brag on message boards about how all of my friends are like Chinese gangsters. Don't pick on me. Give me my calculator back. The Deathless are space Russians, but they're also the space French Foreign Legion, and they're mercenaries, and they have way more money than they know what to do with. The High Church of the Messiah is Emperor. They know when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Serf used to be a church, but they're not a church anymore, and I think they're Scientology, maybe, but like with coffee instead of aliens. But there's also aliens, though, so it's like L. Ron Hubbard and Tim Horton had a baby, and then they made a faction. The Prism Network, they're either the Gestapo or they're CNN, but they're probably also YouTube, and they want to control what you think. House Eridanis has as much money as God, and they're like a big fish that ate a corporation, and now they're a big deal. They used to be part of the House's Minor, but they're not anymore. The Trillion Ring, also very rich. Everything they own is made out of gold. And they're like sexy in the way that like a cyberpunk supplement cover from the 80s is sexy. House Lyra are sad goths, and they're obsessed with the underworld, which I think they think is a real place, but they call it the After, but maybe it's only a metaphysical place. They're weird cultists, but for some reason the church is okay with that, and then also they're really good at art. House Pixis likes having sex with aliens, and they don't understand how space travel works, but they're really into it. Like, they're super, super into it. They're the biggest fans, but they have they're like people who know everything about guns, but have never fired one in their life. And they might end up being the Emperor. The end. There you go. That's the factions. Listen, you know, I tried to do it fast. If House Pixes likes space so much, I dare you to name 3 of Space's albums. The Guild is not a faction. The Guild have a giant metal sphere where they live on the inside of it. And for some reason, House Pixis is always trying to have sex with it. But I guess you could say that about anything. Pick an object. Someone in House Pixis has tried to have sex with it. All right. So Hans Leopold of the Confederation of the Upright Vagrant has asked, how does the loss of the Valen navigation system affect factions such as Vagrant, who've been operating outside mainstream society for years? Do we have our own lesser quality navigation system we've developed internally, or are we in the same boat as everyone else? So I figure everyone in the universe is suffering. And every month that passes, we all suffer more because the Valen navigation system was software as a service. You don't go to Vela and say, hello, I would like some maps. And they're like, here you go. That'll be $49.99. You go to Vela and you say, hello, I would like to subscribe to some maps. And they say, okay, that'll be $49.99 a week. And so they send you, oh, and also you need a specialist to run this program. And they have to be on your ship. Now, there's no one updating the maps. And mostly people don't know how to get those things going. And so we're operating off of, we're running on fumes. And while we're running on fumes, God, it's just like fucking climate change. We know we need to stop using gas. We know eventually the gas will either run out or kill us all. Some people are trying to come up with an alternate system, but mostly people just think like, I don't know, a noble will fix it. It's going great. But yeah, I mean, I imagine that Vagrant and Pixis both are the closest to developing their own new thing, but that would require remapping the whole system, right? Redrawing those spike lanes as they change. Because as we remember, they shift. And again, the physical things don't move, the map doesn't change, but the map doesn't change because we constantly re-update it. I could see, hypothetically, I could see a universe where I put up a project and say, fix the navigation problem, right? Fix the navigation problem. Develop a new system to replace the Valen navigation infrastructure, right? Spend your money, spend time, make rolls, whatever. We get to a point where, all right, we're ready to flip it on. Ready? Go. And then I say, okay, you can move 3 planets up to 3 spaces. Go ahead, right? Change the shape of the universe. Or I could see, uh-oh, you failed, right? You fucked it up. You made the roll and you critically failed it. The system is now broken. I am going to just move planets around, right? Yeah, roll dice and randomly move things around. You could lose a planet, right? We could gain new planets. Like it's a thing. It's a whole thing. And I think Vela, they built the map and and then they blew up the stuff that they used to build it. So the truth of the universe is the Valen truth. And maybe we will discover that the Valen truth isn't the whole truth. And plus, shit moves around. Things change. It's not like they were necessarily, like, lying to us. It's just that they were constantly updating things. And maybe there's an update. Maybe something changes about the way drive space flows that we don't know yet because Vela isn't there to tell us and no one's discovered it. Yeah. So, Zhang the Synergy Man of House Triangulum asks, You've mentioned House Cygnus being geneticists and the like during world building. What were their duties before the whole synth thing? So House Cygnus's thing, I think their original ship was we talked about it being the seed bank for the Empire, right? When they arrived, it was their job to grow things. They were the farmers of the universe. They were animal husbandry, cloning, making disease-resistant plants, genetically modifying plants and animals to live on other worlds. Probably they pitched in on a lot of the bio aspects of Triangulum's terraforming projects. Ironically, I guess, given what ended up killing them. But their job was to like foster that which was alive. What were their words? Because it was something like that, right? House Cygnus, by our hand. And they're exactly, their logo is like two little hands holding a plant, right? So their job was to make things grow. And then they turned this focus on making synths, which was for them just a natural advancement of their thing, right? They made the Garden of Eden. We all just lived in it. And then their hubris. So Alum of the Democratic Mandate asks, will you, as the Space Master, ever put the party, current or future, into the actual events of the faction turn with the agency to change the course of the faction turn, as opposed to what we've seen with them being on the receiving end of waves caused by the factions and their factioneering? Just with the way the timing works, generally I think of the faction turn as a speedboat and the players as water skiers behind that boat, right? They kind of live in the wake of your actions, and that's much easier to manage. Though I will bend that time and space, right? Because it's not linear. It's not like they are X amount of months apart, and a month in the faction turn isn't a real month. It's just an order of operations. I don't really care how much time actually takes between them. It doesn't matter. But I definitely see there are positions where if they blow up an asset, like I'll warn you in advance. I'll be like, cool, the players are on a world that you control, and this thing in the fiction, this building or this, army unit or whatever, this is your whatever asset. And if the players go after it, and this is the thing that we've known is true from the beginning, that the factions are at risk to gain or lose things. But also if they donate a bunch of money or if they help a faction significantly, then, and again, the players have a lot more options now in terms of doing that, given that they're not tied to a specific faction. Yeah. So you kind of want, like, the PCs can help break the rules both for and against the factions. And yeah, you kind of want them to, like, stay away from you, but maybe stay close to you. I don't know. Like, they're dangerous because they're PCs in a role-playing game. Costa asks, I would like to know what will happen, in theory, if a synth gets on the Imperial throne. I mean, how would we know? Like, I guess House Crux, I guess, should like work on this. Is there a test? Do we have to test the Emperor now? Like, we've never had an Emperor during a time where we were at war with the synthetics. So, like, do we have to test for this shit now? Who knows? I don't know. I don't think it'd make a difference. There is, theoretically, there is a thought that maybe the former Emperor was already a synth. All right, pre-coronation vivisection. Like, yeah, you can't really find out. Who knows? God would never allow such a thing to happen. Let's see here. Have you considered at any point, this is from Vasily from Prism X-Ray, have you considered at any point whether you would do a season in a prequel context, jump back in time for a one-shot to flesh out an area or a story you never looked at? If so, where would you go based on season 1? You know, I don't feel the like aggressive pushing desire to do like out of timeline one-shots because I get so much access to all of that stuff just through the faction turn. I think it's definitely possible, but right now, like I'm pretty satisfied. I already get such a like a tiny sliver in the game that I can just turn to the faction stuff. And also, retconning is like quite hard, right? Like if you do a past thing and I'm just like fucking with my own stuff, that's not a big deal. But if I like send someone, we do a past thing and we violate continuity, I'm not only violating my own continuity, but I'm violating the continuity of hundreds of people. Yeah. Corner Goblin of the House of Lyra asks, what is your favorite fizzy cheese flavor? I don't know. I mean, I feel like so many of the good flavors got discontinued recently. And like for a long time, fizzy cheese was like legally like questionable. It's really hard to get shipments of fizzy cheese here on Imperial Prime sometimes. I am fond of the plain flavor. I like that one. I've been trying to get a hold of a canister of the Tootham Midnight, but I haven't been able to get it yet. I heard that they made a special themed comma only flavor that you could use both as food and as a lubricant, and it was supposed to taste like strawberries or something, but I could never get a hold of it. You know, I tried to order it off the website and it was already sold out. Damn it, Umbra. Jizzy cheese. Very nice. Good. You're classing up the joint. So let's see what else we got. Aquila Caligulon Sextulus Ajax of House Aquila asks, has there ever been a synth uprising or similar incident before the actual Cygnus War? Yeah, probably. Not like, we don't call them uprisings, we call them malfunctions. I think probably there are rumors of recalls, right? It wasn't a retirement. Oh man, that's fucking cool. I guarantee prior to all of this stuff, Crux and Cygnus had a shared task force where they did recalls together. You want a fucking, there you go. Here's a new one shot you could do. Yeah. You do a new one shot called tech support or something. It's like a triangulum scientist, the Cygnus boss, and a Crux officer. And they have to troubleshoot broken Cygnus like robots. You could also call it Total Recall, I guess, if you want to. Oh, I like that. That's cool. Yeah, definitely. So I wouldn't say uprising, but incidents, problems, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's a product, and every once in a while, products have bugs, like free will. Are we due for a funeral for the Cygnus Emperor, or does Lyra still have that body sitting around? Lyra still has the body. I don't know, like, have we worked out whether the Cygnus Emperor deserves a funeral? I think we were waiting to find out the results of the assassins, like, trial by prayer. So I don't know, Lyra, get with the church and figure out if that's a thing. Does the former emperor deserve one, or no, right? Do we just place a black shroud over their castle or their statue in the Imperial Hall, right? Maybe it's been destroyed already. Maybe that statue's busted. I don't know. I've talked about this a couple of times before. When I went to Venice back in 2013, 14, I went to this. There's this building in Venice called the Doge's Palace. The Doge is like the Duke of Venice. And in one of the halls, there's all of these like portraits all the way around of all the various Doges. I know. I also love Doges. I think it's pronounced. Wow, such nobility. So there are all these portraits, right? Paintings of them. And then one or more of them has like a black shroud over it, like painted over it, because that particular Doge was like excommunicated. And I love that idea that we have this hall of emperors, like, right? Like Lyran sculptors created these beautiful works of sculpture. And then like, yeah, what happened to the Cygnus one? Do we blow his head off? Do we shroud it? Yeah. Let's see. Kaz of The Guild asks, is there any plans on the Almori pre-tech terraformers and what Triangulum could do with them? I haven't really thought too much about it. I think terraforming is definitely on the list of like shadowy cabal things, like pay to change the tags of a planet. So change the biosphere, change the whatever. Yeah. So I think that fits into that. It would be a requirement, right? You have to have a faction with access to TL5 technology that is willing to pay to do the thing. And then however many factions want to jump in and do that. Yeah. I think I put that on the maybe list for that thing for sure. Yeah. There should be a roll so it can go wrong. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I figure for something like that, it'd be like weather control spells, right? So give you a list of all the different types of biosphere. You're here. You want to move it 1, 2, 3 steps. You roll. Maybe you only move it 1 step. You roll. Maybe you move it all the steps. You fail. Maybe it moves in the other direction. Something goes wrong. You're like, hi, planet. We're here to fix your biosphere. Let's populate it with plants you can eat. Oops. Oh, sorry, it's killing everyone. There's a horrible plague. Well, let's hope it just runs its course. Yeah, and so it rolls randomly on the table or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah, like, yeah, Sombra, exactly. Like the magic wheel. Yep, you got it. And now the plants are eating you. Yep. So Trilliant's Altered Humanity got many revisions over the year. First, it was changed from mutants to sexy cyborgs, then also biomodded people. Then during the new system stream, you said gene-modded archetype doesn't exist as it does in Shadow of the Beanstalk. That was purely for this game. I think that there are biologically modified humans, but remember the human form is sacred. There are no cat girls in mainstream Acheron Row society. That's not a thing. Biomodding to change your base humanity like that's not a thing. Again, certain places you can like do these things illegally, but the idea is that the form that God gave us is sacred and we can try to work on it, but there's no, that's not a thing. But people do what they do. It was just that for this game, I don't want that, because for me, the question of humanity can't be how much do you have to modify yourself to not be human. It's this is what human is. Everything else is not that. And I didn't want to confuse or confound that in play by being like, you're a cat girl. Yeah. So that statement was really more for biomodding based on the thing that's in the game, and then the stuff that's in the system, and then in our unit of players. Yeah. In Stars Without Number, the psychic stuff, there are a few talents that make certain more menial tasks less expensive and translate those talents in Genesis, essentially making certain facets of powers 1 or 0 strain cost instead. This is a question from Triangulum Sart. Yeah, I don't know. I got to work on the faction or the psychic stuff as we go. I don't want to like develop it for other people to use, but if Mark came to me and said, how much XP would I have to spend to be able to just like force move shit around because I want to, I'd be like, well, you have to buy telekinesis first. But like, yeah, it's my psychic stuff is a response to my needs and Mark's needs in the game on its own. Yeah. Rather than develop the whole system in advance. If the PCs get big enough to have or be a part of their own faction, would you let them control it the same as we do, or would they work differently? Poor PCs. All right, well, listen here. So the four of you, you're big enough to control your own faction now. So it's you four against several thousand people. So have fun. Bye. Like, you know that you would just crush them. You just crush them into dirt. I would never want to do that to them, but if they wanted to, okay. But I guarantee there'd be a forgotten, almost immediately there'd be a forgotten order posted. And that'd be it. That'd be the end of it. So, yeah. I'm actually really impressed. No one has missed the order deadline yet. We haven't had any. There've been some fucking close calls, some real close calls. But no one has just flat out like forgotten to submit an order. Good work. You did it. Take an achievement. So Kabugi, who has not decided on a faction to join yet, what sort of Emperor shenanigans can we expect? Will they mostly live on in the background, or might there be large lore changes from their whims? What I think will happen is I will control the Emperor themselves, the person that is the Emperor. But an Emperor doesn't get to make decisions alone, right? So I might occasionally say to that faction, your Emperor demands whatever, right? And they'd be like, how do you respond? And I'd be like, they kick up a fuss or whatever, or they say this. Like, I might just like issue internal edicts to be like, the Emperor wants this. And then for you to be like, no, I'm sorry, my lord. I'm not going to do that. It's about the house, not just the person. The Emperor is a figurehead, right? The Emperor is, they're a person that represents the throne, and they represent their house on the throne, but it's not like they personally make all these decisions alone. Various emperors are more or less willful, but they're not going to just like start giving out like, the Emperor has declared that any person of the empire may, if they wish, marry a horse. So saith the Emperor. So, when will I be choosing a homeworld for the Democratic mandate? Next week? Let's say next week. Let's just say that. I'll pick a homeworld, and I will schedule a meeting with everybody in the Democratic mandate in the voice channel, and we'll just talk about this stuff. I'll have a little private meeting I'll slide into the DMs, and we'll start making those plans. And then I think that's about it for questions for today. I have one last question. All it says, and this is funny, that it comes from a vagrant of the trash fleet, and it says, will you do the vagrant salute? The answer to that question is no. No, I will not. Yeah. So that's that. Cool. Well, if you asked a question and it didn't get answered, this is not the only time I will ever answer this stuff. Thanks for coming and hanging out and checking out some of the ongoing stuff for Verona. I am super excited. If you don't already know, the date has been announced for the next for the beginning of the thing. We're gonna start in almost exactly a month, actually a month and 2 days. So July 6th will be the first episode of Series 2 of Verona. And if you're not already caught up, that gives you lots of time to watch the character creation video. This month's zine, like the last month's zine, has some Verona stuff in it. And yeah, I'm looking very much forward. In the next couple of weeks, Democratic mandate. I will put together a packet for you of information. We'll talk about where your house is going to be and what kind of furniture you can have in it. And I will put together some options for people who want to join and get involved with the shadowy cabal for economic change, which, as we talked about today, is going to lay out some mechanical and some fictional stuff that will change the universe. So remember, the theme going into season 2 is change. So think about how your faction might be changing and how you can contribute to that. Thanks for your questions, everybody, and thank you for coming and hanging out. We will see you next time. Bye, y'all.